you should be looking at. Let me just kind of clean up my site here. So we'll go to the web page first of all. And we'll go to the home page. Just one second. Yes?
I don't think we ever went over the quiz previous to the one we just went over. Maybe it was the chocolate quiz.
Did we look at that one or not? Well, we can, remind me when we got 5 minutes left, and we'll do it then, okay? So just remind me then. Okay, so here it is. The Larry Ford material in regards to rock. You can look at that article, that would be good. You have a little sheet to kind of fill in. So take a look at those study notes. And then 5, 6, and 7. Certainly look at the study guides, no question about that. Texts, there can be things that I say in the lecture that may not be directly in the study guide. I'm not writing, a question for absolutely everything I'm saying. So certainly look at that. And again, it's an anchor score system. I don't expect anybody to get them all right. You're fine. You're fine. And look at your assignment. Those are all back. They look quite good, quite good. And so Gullah Geechee is a nice one because it's both a language and a culture. The Geechee part by scholars is usually identified as that's the culture. The Gullah is the language. So Gullah Geechee. So look those over, look over your other stuff, and you've done an exam before. It should be fairly straightforward,
Is there any way you can unlock the quizzes so we can see what we got wrong in the study?
No, I don't do that. And it's partly because some of these questions are copyrighted. And the textbook editor tells me I'm not allowed to share them because we know where they go then. We know, if you didn't know, there are ways to get them, onto the web. But if you're interested in those kinds of questions, there are commercial sites out there that you could open up, okay? But no, that's one thing I don't do. Sorry, I know that in our really large environmental class of 500, they also have run into a problem like that they wanted to share all these questions with students for them to study from, and they went, there's a real problem. There's a real problem. So sorry about that. But you can come by my office. You can come by my office and you can see any of these things, okay? All right. So yesterday we finished up on ethnicity. I'm just going to touch on the last two sections. They really, we finished up here. We were looking at that voting pattern in Iraq and discovering that it's based upon ethnicity and religion. Okay, we look at these various parties, and it's one of the problems why Iraq remains unstable, that we don't have a single center there. We have a variety of groups. They've been at one another's throats somewhat for centuries, and they're having a hard time forming a single government. And remember from your Syria video, where do these boundary lines come from? Where do these boundary lines come from? It was right in the video, because they said the same thing for Syria.
It was the French and the English, right?
Yeah, the French and the British sat down one day and they said, this looks like a nice place for a line. Oh, we want this, you get that. And it has they never asked the people. And the colonial world is filled with things like that, especially Africa. Unfortunately, we've seen a number of rebellions there already. The most recent split was between what now is South Sudan and Sudan, okay? And there's going to be more of these going on. There's going to be more and more of these going on as various ethnic groups want to have self-control, which kind of gets back to a question that will come up in a minute when we talk. We're gonna briefly talk about Puerto Rico, and I'm hoping that someone might then speak to exactly what's going on there. Okay, we'll come back to that in a minute. All right, genocide, ethnic cleansing. If you're not aware of those words, I don't know how you could not be today. Okay, and it just talks about the fact that this goes on and has been going on throughout a whole number of countries. They give you all kinds of examples. It's very unfortunate, but there it is, and you have examples. The Balkans was the past case in Europe. And you can just kind of look at that and see how it's been reconfigured. And you have two really nice maps in the textbook showing kind of before and after and how they reconfigured that. Okay, so you should be all set with 7. And if you haven't, and here's another example of an artificial country. Belgium, but that's European. Those are nice people. Yeah, but they're kind of at one another's throats. If you go to Belgium, you go to the museums there, they talk about the ethnic tensions. That they were put together because France wanted this territory and Holland wanted this territory, and the only way they could deny it to one another is if they said, neither one of us get it. So they took these two and they put them together and they created, and they gave them a king. They gave him a king as well. Here's your monarchy, he's going to rule you. And they're having a very, very hard time holding it together and having a single government. Okay? All right. So, all of that will be on the exam. And today, we're going to talk about political geography. And we need to start out with some definitions. And again, this is that same problem we saw yesterday when we were talking about patriotism versus nationalism. And I'll admit, we use these words so many different ways that it becomes very, very confusing. And it would be nice if we could create a new one, but we're kind of stuck because of the historical context. The people use the word patriotism, and if we think about the Nazis, we think about nationalism, the bad kind of nationalism. But that doesn't mean all kinds of nationalism under all definitions is bad. It's just that, hey, if we're thinking in this class, we're gonna equate the word nationalism with the nationalism of World War II Germany or Japan. It really isn't that much different. And if we think of patriotism, here we'll give you what we'll think about is July 1st in Canada, okay? Where everybody gets together, and the French and the British, the French and the English. The French speakers and the English speakers, they're all Canadians and they're all happy, and they all do whatever they do on the 1st of July. I don't know what they do on the 1st of July in Canada as such. They do have fireworks and they do sing the national anthem. But yeah, on that day, they're all patriots, and the French speakers and the English speakers all get together, okay? But they're not. They don't sit there and talk about trying to invade the United States. Okay, they're not nationalists. They're not saying, well, we're the best, therefore we better go take over the United States. Okay, so they're not that kind of nationalist, but they certainly are patriots. Okay, so we want to understand these places on the face of the earth. And we call them many different things. The 3 most popular words are a country, a nation, or a state. And there was a geographer, Demko, and Rubinstein also gives you a variation of this, but George Demko probably provided the simplest and the best definitions of what these are and what they aren't. And then we'll look at Japan, which brings to mind another special that's on right now. And have any of you taken the time to watch, what is it? The Shogun, the new Shogun. If you get a chance, watch it, because that is the foundation of Japan as a nation state. when Tokugawa Ieyasu finally brings it together. Now, according to Shogun, which is based upon a novel by Michael Clavel, the British, or was he Dutch? Whatever. He came over there. I think he came on a Dutch ship, and he was British. He's right there with Tokugawa Ieyasu, putting it together. It's almost as if somebody would have come over from China in 1776 and explained to us how to put the United States together. All right. It's a interesting fictionalization, but the key is that is when they finally put Japan together at that time period. And we'll briefly touch upon that. Okay, what's a country? Well, this is the word that we want to forget, even though you're going to hear me say country up here so many times, because in the popular lexicon, we use that. The United States is a country, Russia is a country. Okay, to Demko, it's a useless word because if you go to a definition, look at that. A country is a nation or a state. But he's trying to define the difference between these. And he says the first thing to do is ignore the word country. And again, this is scholarly. This isn't, the way we actually talk. But if we want to define what a difference is, then we want to just ignore the word country. If you're writing some scholarly paper, ignore that. Instead, we're going to have state. And the real key here is going to be government and economy. And that's what Tokugawa Ieyasu puts together for Japan. He gets a national economy and a national government. On the other hand, for Demko, nation really is the people and the culture. And that's why we have the Lummi nation. Okay, the Lummis do not have an internationally recognized government. They don't run the local economy. They participate in it. They do have special fishing rights, but they really don't have sovereignty in an international sense at all. In fact, the strange words, they never used this on the Spokane, and there they call it Spokane Reservation. They don't call it nation. But there, they would never use this word. But in fact, when I would go to a council meeting, really what was going on is that officially, the way the US government thinks about these nations, the Lummi, the Spokanes, the Nooksaks, is that they are nations in tutelage. Okay, erase that from your mind if that confuses you, because it really confused the heck out of me. But it means that, sure, there are these free, independent, semi-independent places. Well, but they really aren't. Okay, nations in tutelage. So they existed before there was the United States, and they exist today, and they have some special rights that were defined in treaties that we many times forget. But nevertheless, they use the word nation, and it fits well with Demko's definition. So people and culture is going to be the key there. Here it's going to be government. And really when we think about government, what we're thinking about is the fact that this is the group that's allowed to exercise violence, which is police power, military, police, whatever. They're the ones that get to enforce the laws. And if you don't like it, they throw you in jail. Okay, that's what a government could do. Now, hopefully, it doesn't come to that, but that's what a government can do. And not only do they police the people, but they also police the economy so that the rules are followed, because we don't want chaos. Stability is the great desire of governments and of states. And in fact, if you would have looked at the announcement that came out of China, they've just had their annual legislative session where everybody knows what's going to happen beforehand. I mean, there isn't any deadlocks in the Chinese assembly, but they stressed stability. We want stability, and therefore we like our leader, and if he wants to stay in there for the rest of his life, that's fine. Okay, so we're going to come back to that idea that states are going to have governments and they're going to control economies, and they want stability. They want stability. Okay, so country, erase that from your mind when we're talking about this particular chapter. It's just a circular definition that Demko says, hey, we're never going to get anywhere with it. So what is a state? And this is the nice thing about his definition. It's 4 very simple points. And you notice I already have a couple of them up there. The first thing is that they have to have some territory. Okay, you got to have some territory to control. All right, this is not an internet state. It's not out on the net somewhere. Maybe someday they will be, but they're not today. A defined territory, boundaries, so that you know this is mine, that's yours. And really, you go out to the, you go up north, and there is a line on the ground. And you step across it, and you're in Canada. You step the other way, and you're in the United States. And I've seen it enforced. Maybe I told you the story in here of a divorced couple. They were trying to send their son from one side to the other. The wife was in Canada. The husband was in the United States. The little boy is standing there. He's about 5 years old, and he's afraid to let go of his dad's hand and walk by himself across the line, which was on the ground there, so he could go and be with his mother for the weekend. And he goes, Dad, please take me across. The father makes the mistake of stepping across the line, and those Canadian border guards rushed out. Sir, you're in Canada now. You can't go back. Right? So it is very, very important. It's a territory. It's defined by boundaries. And this is ours, and that's yours. Okay? Second thing is you got to have a population. Antarctica, even though Chile claims that about half of their country is in Antarctica, there's nobody living down there. And so nobody takes that seriously. And there's no other states in Antarctica. Okay, so defined territory and also a permanent population. People, place. And then the other 2 things are what we've talked about already. You've got to have a government that has sovereignty. It means they get to make all of the choices, and especially internationally. Okay, nobody can tell them what to do. And that then is a state. And the fourth thing is, the only way you're going to make a state work is if you have money. And so they have to be able to control the economy, because otherwise you can't get taxes. And you can't pay the king or the president or the dictator or whoever it is. Okay, so you need those 4 things. You need some money to pay for the government. You need a government, and then you need a place and people. And that is what he is then going to say is a place. And so we have stability, something the Chinese just talked about yesterday, and security. There's lots of security in China. Okay, and basically it means that if you're in this country, see, I slipped into the right way. If you're in this state, that group is in control, whoever that government might be. And the problem with Syria, of course, is that it does not control all the territory right now. And we'll kind of come back and try to figure out, well, what is Syria? Because there is a government there, and they do control part of the economy. They do have some of the territory, and they do have some of the people, but they don't have it all. And I would say at the moment they're a failed state. is what I would say. Prior to the outbreak of the Civil War, they were sort of a multinational state, different ethnic groups, but now at the moment they're sort of a failed state. Now there are places around the world that claim to be states, but very few people recognize them. And here's one of them. There's this island out in the Mediterranean called Cyprus. It's off the coast of Turkey here. If you look up here in this map, you can see it. It's right here, just off of Turkey. Here's Greece, here's Turkey. Syria would be right here. And about 50 years ago, there was a civil war. Population-wise, about 3/4 of the people there are Greek, and 1/4 are Turks. And the Greeks decided they were going to take it over. And then they were going to join with Greece. And the Turks objected, and so the Turkish army came down, and they protected the Turkish population there, and they effectively cut the island into 2 pieces. And it's still like that. There's an armistice line right down through the major city in Cyprus. And if you're on one side, you're in this Turkish-controlled area. If you're on the other side, you're in the Greek-controlled area. They have negotiated back and forth. They keep saying that they'll reunite, but they haven't at the moment. However, this northern part, the Turkish government announced that it was an independent state. Well, it's not. The Turkish government pays their bills. They do not control an economy. And no one else in the world except Turkey recognizes them. So they really don't have sovereignty. It is a piece of territory. It does have a permanent population, but it really doesn't have a functioning international government, and they really don't control their economy. Okay, so there's a place that claims to be a state, but really isn't. Maybe someday it would be, but it's not today. Here's 2 other places. These are in Georgia, and this was the practice run for Ukraine. And Ukraine may be the practice run for Kazakhstan, as we said yesterday. This is the first places that Putin decided to take over. This is in a former Soviet republic, part of the old Soviet empire. There's Russia to the north. This is called Georgia. And it's made up of a number of different ethnic groups. And in fact, in your textbook, it talks a little bit about Georgia and the multiplicity of ethnic groups in there. Well, at one point, the Georgians and the Abkhazis got into a fight, and they went to war. Basically, they went to war. The thing was that Russia said, oh, we'll back you up. And so they carved off this part of Georgia and announced that that is now an independent state. And then a few years later, there was another battle over here, Ossetia, and the Russians did the same thing. Okay, now it's not important to go into the background of was this right, wrong, or anything else, but there are those 2 pieces of territory. To the international community, much like with the Ukraine today, the boundary lines of Georgia include those areas. To Russia and a couple of their syncopats, as we call them, no, those are independent countries. Those are independent, see, I used country again. Independent state. Oh, is this going to work? Something. So there they are, and they have national anthems and everything else, and they probably have, a special day. And the only places that recognize them are Russia, and then places where Russia gives some money or military aid, such as in Syria. Okay, so you can see these are places that are dependent in some way on Russia. And so the deal was, we give you this, you recognize them, and no one else does. And so they're really not true states. Now, and Russia has done a similar thing in part of the Ukraine, areas that they or their allies as we might call them, have occupied for a number of years. They've announced that those two are independent states, and we're assuming that that means that after some period of time, Russia will then annex them and bring them under the Russian umbrella. And they might do the same thing with those territories in Georgia. Okay, we don't know exactly what Putin is planning, but that's quite a possibility. Here is, and I wonder if, I know we have someone that may want to speak to this, Puerto Rico. According to the UN, it's not a colony. It's not really like the state of Washington in the United States. And it's called this thing called a Commonwealth. Did you want to say anything about what its current status is?
Current status is it's recognized as a Commonwealth or a territory. Legally speaking, it's technically not considered part of the U.S., but owned by the U.S. in a very specific distinction for a variety of legal reasons. People born on it are considered American citizens, but they do not get the benefits of a lot of things American citizens might get. In terms of also a lot of retirement benefits, you cannot get if you were born in Puerto Rico and stay in Puerto Rico, but you can get if you are not from Puerto Rico and move there. This economy is such a bit devastated because it's primarily a Navy port and like a shipping area for a lot of stuff for the U.S. and because of its weird technical status, nothing is allowed to come directly into Puerto Rico, and anything that comes into Puerto Rico has to come first through American soil, which is most often the ship has to stop in Florida and then Puerto Rico after that.
So a very, very strange place, and I'm not aware of any other place exactly like that in the world. There may be, but are you aware of any other place that's?
I know America had some. I know it's given up some of them. Because it created a bunch of territories in the 1800s that Puerto Rico was part of the wave of. And I know some of them have changed status, some of them have become independent. I don't know any who occupy the same technical category as Puerto Rico in terms of it being specifically owned and not a part of the U.S. or considered
Yeah, it's very, very strange. Very, very strange. Do you have a?
I think American Samoa is pretty close, but with a few key differences.
Okay.
U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah,
Others.
but somehow they're different at the same time. Okay, so there are a few places left in the world that just don't seem to fall into Demko's nice category there. All right, so now it's a nation. And remember, nation is going to emphasize the people and their culture. So again, we're going to have the first 2 points identical. You got to have a piece of property, according to Demko. And we're going to relax that in a minute. You have to have a piece of property, and you have to have a permanent population there. And they have to have some sort of a common bond, be it culture, language, history. And this is a more difficult definition because these things don't always hold. These things don't always hold. And the first one would be the fact that there have been groups of people that have been forced out of their native area, wherever they had been when we started writing history. Let's just put it that way. And here's a group, they're called the Chechens. They're up there very close to Georgia, and they've always wanted independence, but Russia has denied it to them. And so the Chechens, they've had a number of wars going back to the 1850s and 60s when the Russian Empire first occupied them. And so the Chechens have been very, very resistive. Given the choice, they would want independence. They would want their own state. But they're not given that choice. And in fact, during World War II, when Stalin was being forced back by the Germans, Stalin looked at the Chechens and he didn't trust them. He said, you know, if the Germans come in, they're going to join them, not because of German nationalism, but because they would want independence. And they would see the Germans as granting them independence. And so what he did was he rounded up all of the Chechens and he shipped them out of their area, Chechnya is what they call it, and spread them throughout the Soviet Union. Okay, he did that. They didn't really all get back there until about the 1980s. They slowly started filtering back in, but it was really with the fall of the Berlin Wall that there was no way to keep them out anymore. Okay, many of them had already gotten back by that time, but for a period there of certainly 10 or 15 years, there were not Chechnyans in Chechnya. But they knew they were Chechnyans, regardless of where they went. And you can see, he broke them up and spread them to different places. So they didn't cease to be a people with a common culture, language, and history. And they managed to come back. We could think of Native American tribes like the Cherokee Nation, who also were displaced. And even though they end up out in what now is Oklahoma for a while, they're not about to go back to the southeast where they came from originally, but they know that they are a particular group of people. So that idea of occupying a territory doesn't seem to be a necessity. It's a good thing, but it doesn't seem to be a necessity if somehow you can hold your group together. And you know, the Jewish diaspora, after the Romans got tired of rebellions in Palestine and kicked all the Jews, not all of them, but almost all of them, out of Palestine, is a good example of a group that maintains that common culture over a long period of time. Okay, so the real point being made here is, even though we say that they have to have this territory, well, probably we should say that more in a historical sense, that they needed it in order to create the common culture, language, and history, but they might get pushed out. One might think about Native Hawaiians today. There's, I think, almost as many Native Hawaiians in Las Vegas as there are on the islands, people that claim Native Hawaiian ancestry. And they still, now we're going to find out over the next several decades or generations whether or not they will maintain this Hawaiian identity, even though so many of them have moved to Las Vegas. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there. But certainly that's a sort of experiment being run here in the United States today. The second thing is, when we talk about this common culture, what do we really mean? And people usually think common language. And we saw that many times the same language goes with what we would now define as a nation. But not all places in the world have a single language. In fact, in China, the northern dialects are completely incomprehensible to the southern dialects. In India, they're not even in the same language family. Okay, so we do have examples of places that would consider themselves nations, but really, really different languages within them. And Switzerland is another good example of that. Religion. Here is the split in Germany. You can see the old East Germany because that's where they're not religious, the old communist part. And then you can see there's places which the Catholics dominate and places where the Protestants dominate, but they consider themselves all German. Okay, and so it's up to the group to define what it means to be part of that nation. It's up to the group, okay? So, key, nation stresses people, state stresses the political structure and the money to pay for the political structure, i.e. the economy. You have to control your economy if you're going to have a successful government. Now, if we put those two words together, we get what, in a traditional sense, and we're thinking more European countries, a nation state. And probably the best example that I could give you today would be Iceland. Okay, certainly they have a culture. They've been separated from the continent for hundreds of years. They have a language which is different than the language of the rest of Scandinavia. And they have a government and an economy. Okay, so they're definitely a state, and they're definitely a nation. They are different than other Scandinavians, and they know that. Okay, so that would be the perfect example. And then we start going around Europe, and you can see that we kind of think, well, there's the French, and they have France, and there's the Germans of today, and they have Germany, and then the Czechs, and they have the Czech Republic, and the Spanish, so that it somewhat fits. It somewhat fits. And historically, that idea that one nation, one state kind of works out. And a lot of that idea of the nation state comes out of World War I when the great empires were split up. And we'll see some maps of these from the textbook next week. The splitting of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, the Russian Empire at the time, the Ottoman Empire. And after World War I, the United States, along with the Europeans, sat down and they said, well, where are we going to put these boundary lines? Well, we know what they did in the Middle East. That didn't work at all, okay? But in Europe, the idea was that if you could define yourself as a nation, a common people, you deserved your own state. And we began very much drawing those boundary lines in Europe after 1918, 1920, based upon the commonality of the culture. And so that in a general sense, European countries are primarily nation states, a single nation, a single state in the same place. Now, we did make some mistakes during that time period, and one of the things that occurred was the creation of Yugoslavia, which simply means Southern Slavic people. And they did not get along. They did not get along, and they finally started to split up in the 1990s after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Empire. And so now, if we look at what was Yugoslavia, you're going to find, I think there's 7 different states there. There's at least 4 or 5. And each one of them is a group which considers itself a nation. And therefore, they wanted boundary lines for their state. The only real exception was Bosnia, where inside of the boundary line of the traditional Bosnia, we had 3 different groups. And nobody could decide what to do. I suspect that in the next several decades, it's going to be split, and the Croat part is going to go to Croatia, the Serbian part is going to go to Serbia, and the Bosniaks, who really represent the Muslims, left over from when the Ottoman Empire invaded and they converted to Islam, they probably will have a separate nation state. But I don't know. I don't know. Other than that, most of Yugoslavia now is nation states such as Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro. What do they call it? They call it Northern Macedonia. Is there another one? Well, and Kosovo has been split off because they were Albanians. Okay, so nation states certainly has been the way that Europe has gone. And we might even see more of these because some people in Spain don't feel like they really are Spanish as such. They're Catalonian, and they want their place. What was once called Czechoslovakia split because there was two different Slavic groups there. There was the Bohemians or the Czechs, and there were the Slovaks. And so they had what was called the Velvet Divorce. They sat down, they didn't fight, there was no war, and they simply said, we want two different countries. See, I've used the same name again there. We want two different nation states. And so that's what they did, they split. There could be a fracturing of Italy. Northern Italy and southern Italy are economically really, really different. And the northern Italians don't necessarily think that the southern Italians work hard enough. Because in the north, that's where the wealthy part of Italy is. In the south, they see those as the people that they're sending money to, and they're ungrateful. It might split. It might split. In fact, the political party that's in power there is a northern political party. And so it might happen. And there's other places. Scotland might split from the United Kingdom is what their official name is. Mm-hmm.
You told me to remind you when we have 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, good. All right. So you get a really good idea here. And we're going to come back and we're going to use Japan. We'll look a little bit more at these, but I just want to say, hey, if you haven't had a chance over the weekend, go watch Shogun. Okay, so you'll be ready. Okay, so we need to bring up that little quiz. And I think I'll go through the web page so I make sure I have the quiz exactly as you saw it. As you can see, as I'm making them, many times I,